welcome to the deep dive.
Hey there.
So today we're going to forget the fantasy maps for a second, maybe even the dragons,
Okay, I'm with you.
because we're digging into something that's, well, kind of wild.
Uh-huh.
How Game of Thrones, one of the biggest TV shows ever, is actually surprisingly grounded in, well, real life.
Right. It's not all made up, is it?
Not at all. We've got this, stack of sources, articles, historical dives, transcripts.
All basically asking the same thing.
Yeah. Where did Game of Thrones really come from?
What was the inspiration behind it all?
So our mission today, in this deep dive, is pretty much to unearth the real history, the actual events, the figures.
That George R.R. Martin wove into his story.
Exactly. And you think about how huge the show became, it just broke all the rules, right?
Completely. The viewership numbers were just staggering.
Like season 1, what was it? Averaging over 9 million viewers in the U.S. alone.
Yeah, and by season 7, it jumped to something like 33 million.
It's just crazy. And okay, the production was enormous, sure, but the story.
The story was the heart of it. That's what hooked people.
That powerful, often really shocking story. Well, it turns out history might hold a lot of the secrets.
A surprising amount, yeah. It's fascinating when you look into how deeply Martin drew from historical events. So many of the show's biggest moments, the characters, those gut-wrenching betrayals.
They have parallels in real history.
Oh, absolutely. Striking parallels, especially in medieval history. He wasn't just pulling it out of thin air.
He was like remixing reality.
That's a great way to put it. Remixing reality.
And the sources really back that up. So
Yeah.
let's dive right into the core conflict, the big one that kicks everything off, the war over the throne.
Right.
In the show, King Robert Baratheon dies suddenly, and that just ignites this brutal fight for the Iron Throne among the big families.
And if you look back in history, you see this dramatic echo. The Wars of the Roses.
In England, right, 14th, 15th century.
Exactly. A long, really bloody struggle for the English throne between two major branches of the royal family, the House of York
The White Rose.
and the House of Lancaster.
The Red Rose.
And our sources connect the Lannisters in the show pretty directly to the historical Lancasters.
Right, and they're big rivals, the Starks.
They're linked to the Yorks. So you've got your core families battling it out historically.
And the spark wasn't a boar hunt, but it was still about who gets the crown.
Precisely. It goes back to King Edward III. He reigned for 50 years, died in 1377.
Okay.
Now, instead of passing the crown to one of his two living sons, he named his grandson as heir, the son of his deceased eldest son.
Ah, skipping a generation.
Yeah, and that grandson became Richard II.
So the descendants of those two sons who got skipped?
They became the houses of York and Lancaster. And they absolutely did not forget their claim to the throne. That resentment just simmered.
For decades, you said.
For decades. Then, fast forward to 1399, the leader of the Lancasters, Henry IV, he actually overthrows Richard II, takes the throne.
Okay, so the Lancasters grab power.
Right. And his son followed him, the famous Henry V.
Henry V. And here's where we see that parallel to Robert Baratheon, isn't it? Robert dies suddenly after that hunt, suffering in his tent.
And Henry V, he also died suddenly during a military campaign from what sources call an unexplained injury, and apparently suffered quite a bit in his tent before he died. The parallel is, well, pretty striking. A powerful king's unexpected death throwing everything into chaos.
So chaos definitely follows. After Henry V comes his son, Henry VI. And the sources describe him as not exactly strong.
No, not at all. Weak-willed, potentially dealing with serious mental illness, maybe even schizophrenia.
And a weak king often means
A power vacuum. Or at least space for others to step in and wield influence. And Henry VI married Margaret of Anjou.
a French princess, described as beautiful, but also...
Fierce and smart, one of the most formidable women in Europe at the time, according to the sources.
Okay, I think I know where this is going. The historical Cersei Lannister.
That's Margaret of Anjou, a powerful woman effectively running things around a less capable ruler.
And, just like Cersei, the English people apparently hated her, saw her as an outsider.
Very much so. A foreign queen pulling the strings. Her main rival. A man brought down from the north to be the king's advisor and protector, Richard of York.
Ah, there's our Ned Stark figure.
Exactly. Richard tried to fix the problems caused by the king's poor state, the poverty and misery, and he gained a lot of power and popularity doing it.
Which Margaret The Cersei figure would not have liked one bit.
Definitely not. Our sources say she used one of the king's mental episodes to get him to sign an order banishing Richard back to the north.
Wow, sounds just like Ned getting pushed out of King's Landing.
It really does. And Richard of York, like Ned Stark, didn't just fade away. He eventually gathered his supporters, his banners.
And challenged Margaret.
He tried, but the Lancasters defeated him in battle. He was captured.
Oh, no.
And his head was cut off.
Just like Ned Stark, Season 1 finale. Brutal.
It's a shocking end for that kind of noble protagonist figure. And the historical detail gets even more chilling.
How so?
The sources say Richard's severed head was put on display above Micklegate Bar in York.
Okay.
And mocked with a paper crown.
No way. Just like in the show, with Ned's head on the spikes. Martin used that exact detail.
He absolutely pulled from that specific gruesome imagery. The main challenger to the throne, decapitated, publicly shamed.
But the fight doesn't end there, does it?
Right.
The next generation steps up.
Right, because now you have the sons looking for revenge. Richard of York's son, Edward IV.
Okay.
He leads a campaign from the north. He wants vengeance against the Lancasters and Margaret.
So he's the Robb Stark figure leading the war after his father's execution.
Precisely. And on the other side, Margaret had a son too, Edward of Westminster. And here's a dark twist. Our sources mention there were questions about his parentage, maybe illegitimate.
Okay, hinting at Joffrey.
That's the connection, yeah. And apparently, despite having angelic looks as a young man, he was raised on violence. Reports say he actually enjoyed condemning people to death, even when he was just like an 8-year-old kid.
Whoa, okay. That makes Joffrey's cruelty seem disturbingly plausible.
Sadly, maybe so. History can be dark. Anyway, the two sides meet at the Battle of Tewkesbury. York's versus Lancasters.
And Margaret's son, the Joffrey figure.
Edward of Westminster. He was defeated, and despite supposedly pleading for his life, he was killed, beheaded actually, at age 20.
So the Robb Stark figure gets some revenge. The Joffrey figure meets a bad end. But Margaret...
She escaped again. But her side was effectively broken at that point.
So the Wars of the Roses seem to be mirroring the show's plot points pretty closely here. But the fight for the Iron Throne kept going. Different players emerged.
And so did the Wars of the Roses, because across the English Channel, waiting in exile in France, was Henry Tudor.
Henry Tudor. And you're saying he is the historical parallel for Daenerys Targaryen.
That's what our sources suggest. It seems unlikely at first, an exiled prince for the Mother of Dragons, but hear me out.
Okay, I'm listening.
Henry was from a branch of the Lancasters, the losing side, who had fled after Margaret's defeat.
Right.
While he was in exile, the ruling Yorks tried to have him killed multiple times.
Just like the assassination attempts on Daenerys.
Yeah.
Okay, I see that parallel. An heir in exile, targeted by the ruling power.
Exactly. And from a very young age, Henry Tudor believed he was the rightful king, even though he had no army, no real power base, and definitely no dragons.
You're the dragon.
But in 1484, he felt the time was right. He gathered ships, sailed across the Channel to Britain.
A historical crossing, just like Daenerys crossing the Narrow Sea.
A very similar dynamic, and just like Dany needed allies in Essos.
He needed allies in
Yeah,
Britain.
he did. He appealed to the Welsh, who really hated the ruling Yorks.
And they helped him.
They did. They gave him an army, about 6,000 men, to challenge the York king.
So he lands, he has an army.
And he meets the York forces at the Battle of Bosworth Field, and Henry Tudor, the Lancaster claimant, wins. He takes the throne.
Wow, so the exiled contender actually wins it all. And then how did he end the whole conflict for good? Because the Wars of the Roses had been going on for ages.
His genius move, according to the sources, he married a princess from the defeated York family.
Uniting the houses. Like the idea of Daenerys marrying Jon Snow, who was secretly...
Exactly, a Targaryen linked to the opposing side, potentially. This marriage politically united the White Rose and the Red Rose, and effectively ended the 30-year War of the Roses.
That's incredible. So this whole bloody, decades-long war...
Yeah.
It must have had a huge impact on England.
Oh, absolutely. It wiped out a huge portion of the old English nobility and royal lines, and that had massive long-term consequences, contributing significantly to the end of feudalism in England. It reshaped the whole society.
It really sounds like Martin used the Wars of the Roses as, like, the skeleton.
That's foundational blueprint, yeah.
But then he fleshed it out with details and twists from other places, other times.
He definitely wasn't just copying history page for page. He was inspired by it, mixing and matching elements to create something new and unpredictable.
Speaking of unpredictable,
yeah.
Let's shift gears from the big political wars to a very specific, very memorable weapon. The Battle of the Blackwater. in the show. Stannis attacks King's Landing by sea.
Big naval assault.
And the Lannisters unleash wildfire. This green stuff that burns on water just devastates his fleet.
Right. A game changer in that battle. But that wasn't pure fantasy either.
Really? There was something like wildfire.
History has a chillingly similar weapon. The Byzantine Empire's secret weapon, Greek fire.
Greek fire. Okay.
This was absolutely crucial during the sieges of Constantinople, especially against huge Arab naval attacks in the 7th and 8th centuries. We're talking massive fleets, one time nearly 800 ships attacking the city.
800 ships. And the Byzantines used this Greek fire against them.
They did. It was a liquid weapon shot through siphons that ignited crucially on contact with water. It completely stunned their enemies.
I can imagine burning on water.
The effect was devastating, not just militarily, but psychologically. Imagine your ship is burning, you jump overboard to save yourself.
And the water catches fire, too.
Exactly. Pure terror. Our sources stress how vital Greek fire was. It arguably saved the Byzantine Empire from being conquered multiple times, allowing it to survive for another 700-plus years. Just its reputation was terrifying enough to deter some attacks.
Wow. There's a quote here from historian John Norwich saying it's impossible to overestimate the importance of Greek fire.
And he's probably right. Now, here's the kicker where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The exact recipe for Greek fire. It was a top state secret of the Byzantine Empire. And to this day, it's still a historical mystery. We don't know exactly what it was.
Seriously, we still don't know.
We have theories, of course, based on descriptions, likely involve things like pine resin, naphtha, which is like petroleum, maybe sulfur, nitrates.
Okay.
One popular theory involves quicklime. Quicklime reacts very strongly with water, generates a lot of heat.
Which could ignite the oil mixture?
That's the idea. It would burst into flames when it hit the water.
That's an exact parallel to wildfire in Game of Thrones, held secret by the Alchemists Guild in King's Landing.
Precisely. The secret knowledge held by this specific ancient group tied to the city. And just like the Byzantine secret was eventually lost when the empire fell.
The wildfire secret is closely guarded, almost lost, then rediscovered and used by Cersei later on with devastating results. Burning the sept.
History providing the template for fantasy's superweapon.
Okay, let's pivot to maybe the single most shocking moment in the entire series for many people, the Red Wedding.
Ah, yes. The Red Wedding. Unforgettable or horrifying.
It's just brutal. A total betrayal of hospitality. Robb Stark, his pregnant wife Talisa, his mother Catelyn, their key bannermen, all massacred at a wedding feast. Hosted by the Freys, who were supposed to be allies.
George R.R. Martin has actually said that this moment was directly inspired by two real historical events. Both are chilling examples of violating guest right, according to our sources.
Two events. Okay, what's the first one?
The first is known as the Black Dinner, happened in Scotland, 1440.
Black Dinner.
The young King James II, he was only 10 years old at the time, invited the leaders of the powerful Black Douglas clan to a feast at Edinburgh Castle. This was the 16-year-old Earl of Douglas, his younger brother David, and their followers.
A feast invitation from the king. Sounds safe enough.
You'd think so. But during the meal, a signal was given. A platter was brought out bearing the head of a black bull.
A black bull's head. What did that mean?
It was a symbol of death. Immediately, soldiers loyal to the king's advisors rushed in, grabbed the Douglas brothers and their men, gave them a mock trial, and executed them right outside.
While they were guests. After a feast invitation.
Exactly. Our source mentions the boy king was apparently terrified and pleaded with his advisors to stop, but they went ahead. They feared the Douglas clan's power was growing too much, threatening their own influence over the young king.
That's cold-blooded political murder disguised as hospitality. But the Red Wedding felt even more personal, like a deeper betrayal of trust.
And that's where the second inspiration likely comes in, maybe even more strongly. It's the Glencoe Massacre, also in Scotland, but much later, 1691.
Glencoe Massacre.
Right. Bit of context. King William of Orange had taken the throne from King James VII. William demanded all Scottish clan chiefs swear an oath of loyalty by January 1st, 1692.
Okay, standard procedure for a new king.
Mostly. But the MacDonald clan of Glencoe had issues. First, the king's main advisor in Scotland actively hated them. Second, they felt bound by tradition to get permission from the old king, James VII, before swearing to William.
Ah, caught in the middle. Did they get permission?
They did eventually, but the messenger carrying the permission, who happened to be from a rival clan, the Campbells deliberately delayed delivering it.
Oh, dirty tricks.
So the MacDonald chief finally took the oath, but it was after the deadline.
And King William, pushed by the advisor who hated them,
Saw it as defiance. He signed orders for a severe punishment. To put all to the sword under 70 was the phrase used.
horrifying. And how do they carry it out? This is where the betrayal comes in.
This is the truly sickening part. A company of about 120 soldiers, mostly from the rival Campbell clan, commanded by Captain Robert Campbell, marched into Glencoe.
Okay.
They didn't arrive as enemies. They claimed they needed lodging, that the barracks elsewhere were full. They presented themselves as fellow soldiers. Allies, even.
And the MacDonalds.
The MacDonalds had just sworn loyalty, remember, even though it was late. So they welcomed the soldiers. They followed the Highland Code of hospitality to the letter. They housed them, fed them, shared drinks with them for nearly 2 weeks.
2 weeks. While the soldiers had secret orders to kill them.
Yes, secret orders from the government. The orders even specified to let the old men escape into the mountains, assuming they'd die of the cold. Calculated cruelty.
So what happened?
After being hosted as guests for almost a fortnight, the soldiers waited until after midnight. Then they attacked their hosts while they slept, slaughtered the men in their beds, including the chief. They then burned the houses.
Oh my God.
Women, children, and the elderly who weren't killed outright were forced to flee into the freezing January mountains in the middle of winter. Many, many died of exposure. It was an absolute brutal violation of guest right, trust, and basic humanity.
That sounds exactly like the Red Wedding. The being hosted, the betrayal, the sudden slaughter.
You can see precisely why Martin drew inspiration from it. It's almost unimaginable cruelty, but it actually happened. It makes the Red Wedding feel horrifyingly real.
History really is darker than fiction sometimes.
Ugh.
Okay, let's go north to the Wall.
Right, the Wall.
In the show, this immense barrier of ice and magic, built by the first men, supposedly, to keep out the dangers from the far north, like the White Walkers, guarded by the Night's Watch.
And George R.R. Martin himself has talked about where that idea came from. He visited the UK in the 1980s and went to see the ruins of Hadrian's Wall.
Hadrian's Wall.
Built by the Romans, right?
Exactly. Around 122 AD, Emperor Hadrian ordered it built. It's this massive stone wall stretching 117 miles across the north of England.
And it was built to keep people out. Pretty much. It was a defense against the Pictish tribes, the barbarians, as the Romans saw them, from what's now Scotland. It marked the northernmost edge of the Roman Empire, the boundary between Roman civilization and the unknown wilds beyond.
And Martin said he stood there.
Yeah, he imagined being a Roman soldier stationed on that wall, looking out into the cold, the mist, the very edge of the known world, wondering what monsters, real or imagined, might be out there in the dark and the ice. He said he wanted to capture that feeling.
That feeling of being the shield against the darkness. But in Game of Thrones, the wall, it doesn't hold forever, does it?
No. Despite its size and magic, when the White Walkers finally return in force, it comes crashing down relatively easily, actually.
And historically, Hadrian's Wall. Did it hold?
It also eventually failed in its purpose.
Yeah.
As the Roman Empire started to decline, maybe late 4th century, they began pulling troops away from the frontier, from the wall, to deal with problems closer to home.
Internal issues.
Right. And eventually, Rome just lost control of Britain altogether. The wall was abandoned.
So, just like the wildlings and others eventually crossed the wall in the show, sometimes even integrating.
Scottish tribes moved south after Hadrian's Wall fell into disrepair. People living nearby even took stones from the wall to build their own houses and farms. It was just recycled.
So the theme there, both in the show and in history, seems to be about the limits of walls.
I think so. That these massive physical barriers might offer protection for a while, maybe even centuries. But they can't ultimately stop the big shifts. The wheel of history, migration, fundamental change. Walls eventually fall or become irrelevant.
That's a really powerful connection. Okay, let's look at another distinct group, the Dothraki.
Ah, the horse lords of Essos.
Nomadic warriors, masters of horses, incredible fighters. In the show, they start off seeming very distant, almost alien to Westeros. But then they cross the sea, and their arrival is this terrifying, game-changing event.
And again, Martin had real-world inspiration. Our sources point directly to the nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppe, especially the Mongols.
Genghis Khan and his successors.
Exactly. The parallels are really strong. Their entire life centered on horses, their leadership structures, with a powerful warlord at the top, a Khal, versus the historical Khan.
Right. Khal Drogo, Genghis Khan.
Even cultural details match up, like the Dothraki pride in their long hair, never cutting it if undefeated.
Yeah, Khal Drogo's braid.
That echoes a Mongol belief that a warrior's strength resided in his hair and their warfare. Lightning-fast cavalry attacks, shock and awe tactics, followed by absolutely terrifying vengeance, often burning entire cities to the ground.
That sounds exactly like the historical accounts of the Mongols.
It really does. And the Dothraki eventually crossing the Narrow Sea, landing in Westeros as this seemingly unstoppable foreign force. That mirrors the profound shock and terror felt by Europeans when the Mongol hordes, who they previously thought of as just some distant nomads in Asia, suddenly appeared on their doorstep in the 1230s.
They came out of nowhere from Europe's perspective.
Pretty much. And they were devastatingly effective militarily. They crossed frozen rivers, destroyed major cities like Moscow, Kiev. They wiped kingdoms like Georgia and Armenia practically off the map.
Wow.
And they repeatedly defeated large combined armies of the major European powers, Poland, Hungary, German knights, French knights, in major battles around 1241. The destruction was immense. Some sources estimate they killed maybe half the population of Hungary in just 1 year.
Half the population? That's almost unimaginable. What stopped them from conquering all of Europe?
Well, interestingly, it wasn't really a European military victory that stopped their westward push. It was mainly internal factors within the Mongol Empire. Political struggles, succession disputes after the death of the great Khan Ogedai.
So internal conflict halted their external expansion?
Largely, yes. It's a classic historical lesson, maybe.
Yeah.
You need control and stability at home to keep winning abroad.
Fascinating. Even the reason they stopped has a sort of echo in the show's themes of internal conflict. Okay, let's talk about the creatures.
Dragons. Gotta talk about dragons.
The ultimate fantasy element, right? In the show, they were thought to be extinct, just legends, but remembered as these terrifying weapons the Targaryens used, like the Mad King burning his enemies.
What's amazing is how dragons, or dragon-like creatures, pop up in myths and legends all over the world independently.
Yeah, across so many different cultures, going back thousands of years.
Yeah.
Mesopotamia, China, ancient Greece, European folklore like St. George.
And despite all the variations in how they look or behave, they share these core features. Reptilian, maybe bird-like. They fly, they often breathe fire, and they're usually seen as powerful, often dangerous or evil.
So why? Why are dragons such a universal myth?
Yeah.
Our sources mention a couple of main theories historians kick around.
Right. The first one is psychological. It suggests humans have this kind of innate, maybe evolutionary fear of certain things.
Like what?
Reptiles, snakes, lizards. We have a natural aversion. Fire is inherently dangerous. We respect and fear it. And flight represents power, freedom, something unattainable for humans. So, Theory 1 posits that the collective human imagination unconsciously combines these powerful fears and desires into one ultimate creature, the dragon. A flying, fire-breathing reptile. It's like a symbol born from our deepest anxieties and aspirations.
An archetype almost.
Yeah.
Built into our psyche. What's the second theory?
The second theory is more about physical evidence. It suggests that throughout history, people in different parts of the world occasionally stumbled upon large, unusual bones.
You mean dinosaur fossils?
Exactly. Before paleontology, people found these massive fossilized bones. They had no framework to understand dinosaurs, so they interpreted them as the remains of giant, mythical creatures. Dragons fit the bill.
So they found a T-Rex skull and thought, giant lizard monster.
Kinda, yeah. And they might have added legendary abilities like breathing fire to explain other phenomena they didn't understand, like natural gas vents catching fire or lightning strikes causing fires.
So the most fantastical part of Game of Thrones might have roots in ancient people finding dinosaur bones.
It's a plausible theory. Our sources mention ancient Chinese texts that explicitly describe finding fossilized dragon bones. We now know these were dinosaur fossils. Similar finds likely influenced legends in India, Greece, and elsewhere. People saw big bones, imagined big creatures, and the dragon myth took shape.
That's incredible. It grounds the fantasy in such an unexpected way. Okay, finally, let's look at one more key character archetype, the Mad Ruler.
Ah, yes. Aerys II, Targaryen, the Mad King.
The show gives us his backstory. Started out okay, maybe even charismatic, but descended into paranoia, cruelty, insanity. Obsessed with burning people, burn them all.
Right. His madness ultimately triggered Robert's rebellion, led to his own death by his Kingsguard, Jaime Lannister, and ended the Targaryen dynasty's rule.
And our sources draw a very strong parallel here with a specific historical figure.
Roman Emperor Nero became emperor super young, 16 years old, back in 54 AD.
Nero, infamous name. But like the Mad King, he didn't start out bad.
Surprisingly, no. His first 5 years on the throne are often called the Quinquennium Neronis, and some historians actually view it as a period of relatively good government.
Really? Nero had a golden age.
Arguably, yeah. Initially, he seemed to increase the Senate's power, make government more accessible, focused on arts, public entertainment, even tried to make the justice system fairer, like requiring defense lawyers for the accused.
That sounds completely different from the image we have of him. What changed?
Well, his mother, Agrippina the Younger, was very influential in getting him the throne and wielded a lot of power early on. As Nero grew older and maybe more unstable, he decided she had to go.
He killed his own mother.
He tried to make it look like an accident, first arranged for her boat to sink, but she survived. So then he just dropped the pretense, declared her a traitor, and sent soldiers to kill her.
Okay, that's a dark turn. And it didn't stop there.
That seemed to be the point of no return. He killed his first wife, Octavia. He violently killed his second wife, Poppaea, reportedly kicking her while she was pregnant. He had his stepbrother Britannicus poisoned. He even forced his old tutor, the famous philosopher Seneca, who guided him in those early good years, to commit suicide.
Which is a spiral of paranoia and murder. And then there's the Great Fire of Rome.
Right. In 64 AD, a massive fire burned for 6 days, destroyed huge parts of the city. The historical accounts are debated, but some ancient writers claimed Nero watched from his palace, playing his lyre, maybe even reveling in it. Many Romans at the time suspected he started it himself, perhaps to clear land for a new palace.
Whether he started it or not, his reaction is key, isn't it, in relation to the Mad King?
Absolutely crucial. Nero needed a scapegoat for the fire. He blamed the Christians, who were a small, misunderstood religious sect at the time.
And he persecuted them.
Brutally. He ordered mass arrests, torture, and famously he had Christians coated in pitch and burned alive in his gardens at night, used as human torches to provide light.
Human torches. Burn them all. The parallel to the Mad King's obsession is undeniable.
It's chillingly direct, and this act of scapegoating and burning innocents horrified many Romans, even those who disliked Christians, and really cemented Nero's monstrous reputation.
So how did Nero's reign end, like the Mad King's?
Pretty much. After 14 years of this escalating tyranny and cruelty, he faced widespread rebellion from provincial governors and the army. The Senate declared him a public enemy. He fled Rome. But when capture seemed inevitable, he couldn't bring himself to do it, so he ordered his personal secretary to kill him. Suicide by proxy, essentially. Ending his life under threat, much like the Mad King died at the hands of his own Kingsguard, Jaime.
And as our sources point out, that controversial ending for Daenerys in the show.
Yeah, her turn towards destruction, arguably mirroring her father's madness.
It brings her whole arc right back to this historical parallel with Nero, the promising ruler descending into tyranny. It's a recurring pattern, sadly.
It really shows how Martin wasn't afraid to follow those darker historical precedents, even if it meant subverting fantasy expectations about heroes and happy endings.
So, wrapping things up.
Yeah.
While the show's ending, especially that final episode, was definitely divisive, our sources mention the low ratings from viewers and critics.
Yeah, people had strong feelings about the finale.
No doubt.
Yeah.
But the series as a whole, it's undeniably entered the history books as this huge cultural phenomenon.
Absolutely massive. And beyond the incredible production values, a huge part of that impact was the complexity. The way the characters developed, often unpredictably, often brutally. It felt real in a way a lot of fantasy doesn't.
Because people you cared about could fail, could die, could turn dark. Villains sometimes won.
Exactly. And as we've spent this whole deep dive exploring through the sources, a massive reason for that complexity, that unpredictability, that impact comes directly from George R.R. Martin's deep dive into actual human history.
There's that famous quote attributed to him, right?
Yeah.
When asked why he was so cruel to his characters.
Yeah, he reportedly said something like, "You think I'm cruel? Go read history. History is crueler than I am."
And looking back at the Wars of the Roses, the Black Dinner, Glencoe, Nero, it's kind of hard to argue with him, isn't it?
It really is. History is just full of these dramatic ups and downs, heroes falling, villains rising, good not always winning, protagonists meeting really rough ends. Life is messy and often unfair.
So this deep dive into the sources really shows that those shocking, powerful narrative choices in Game of Thrones, the ones that made us gasp or cry or yell at the screen, they weren't just pulled out of thin air.
No, they are often deeply, deeply rooted in the very real, often incredibly brutal tapestry of our own human past.
So what does all this mean for you listening?
Well, maybe it means that the stories that grip us the most, even the epic fantasies with dragons and ice walls, resonate so strongly because at their core, they're reflecting something true about ourselves, about our own complex, unpredictable, and sometimes downright terrifying history.
Or maybe, just maybe, it's a reminder that reality, actual human history, is often stranger, bloodier, and perhaps even crueler than anything fiction can dream up. Definitely something to think about.